Good morning. Thanks for joining me. My name's Dean Mays. I'm an Australian author living here in Adelaide, and I'm doing this for the very first time, a Facebook Live video solo, in which I'll be reading from my brand new novel, The Artisan Heart, which came out just on a month ago now. So it's been out on the shelves for a little while. And the idea of doing this reading came to me from a friend on Facebook, Ainsley. So thank you, Ainsley. Yeah, I thought it'd be worth giving it a go. So I haven't rehearsed for this. I'm going to just dive in, and we'll see how we go. And after I finish reading, I'll open it up to the audience. I've got some questions that came to me leading up to the event, and yeah, we'll see what happens between now and then. So let's get into it. So this is The Artisan Heart, my brand new novel. So Chapter 1. High on the emergency department wall, a large digital clock flashed 6 p.m. The inner city children's hospital was a beehive of activity this evening, with people rushing to and fro, the noise of conversation and instruction competing with the mechanised sounds of medical monitors. Each of the 11 cubicles, arranged in a herringbone formation around a central glass partition station dubbed the fishbowl, was occupied by ailing children and their guardians. Nursing and medical staff passed in and out, undertaking initial examinations, recording observations, performing procedures. Other employees moved between the fishbowl and the cubicles, armed with request forms for radiology, pathology, or allied health consultations, or ferrying newly arrived results to the medical team. The activity was frenetic, though not unusual for this time on a Friday. It was chaos, but it was organised chaos. A young nurse emerged from behind a curtain where she had just deposited a young couple and their infant baby girl. Her features taut with concern, she began scanning the department, searching. The baby behind her was screaming in her mother's arms, arching her back and splaying her arms out wide. The nurse glanced back to see both mother and father calming her as best they could. The nurse ground her teeth. Where is he? She caught the attention of one of her colleagues, signalling him with a nod. Though he was in the middle of a phone call, he lifted the receiver away from his ear. "Have you seen Lushcombe?" she mouthed. The male nurse shook his head apologetically as he pointed to the handset, indicating he had to return to the call. She growled, annoyed. Behind her, the distressed parents cradled the child between them as the little girl screamed louder. The nurse looked back as the baby began to froth at the mouth. Damn it! The nurse marched into the fishbowl and stabbed the PA switch. In a quiet staff tea room, located away from the department, a solitary figure in navy scrubs reclined in a lounge chair, his long legs resting on a coffee table with his feet hanging over the edge. His eyes were closed, his chiseled jaw relaxed. A foam coffee cup balanced in his fingers, and an open book lay across his chest, nearly obscuring the clip-on badge that displayed his credentials. Paediatric Emergency Consultant. Hayden Lushcombe drifted, having closed out all extraneous sound. His mental relaxation technique was near absolute. In his mind, an echo accompanying a procession of imagery registered as a sort of auditory hallucination. Don't call me now, don't call me now. There was less than half an hour until his shift ended. He'd already handed over his patients to the incoming registrar, and he was praying he would make it until knock-off time without being called again. His solitude was broken, however, by the squeal of feedback over the PA speaker, followed by a tinny female voice that caused him to jump in his seat. The foam cup pitched from his grip. Dr. Lushcombe, priority 3 in cubicle 2. Dr. Lushcombe. Hayden's eyes snapped open and he glared at the clock on the wall. 15 minutes. Groaning, he removed the book from his chest and leaned over the arm of the chair, blinking at the slick of coffee trailing from the upended cup. He snatched up the cup and tossed it in the nearby bin, then scratched his fingers through his tousled, sandy hair and kicked his athletic body forward. He deposited his book, The Craftsman Woodturner, onto the table where it slid across an array of glossy women's magazines and dropped to the floor, right into the puddle of coffee. He cursed, lunging for a roll of paper towels and hurriedly mopping up the mess as his name sounded over the intercom once more. He stood, straightened his top, then strode out of the tea room. Emerging through a concealed access door into the emergency department, Hayden found himself confronted by the young nurse who babbled off a procession of clinical information and symptoms concerning the baby in the cubicle. Though he feigned attention, nodding his head rhythmically, she could tell he only registered a few words of what she was saying. Arriving at the cubicle, Hayden pulled the curtain aside and acknowledged the parents with a curt nod. His attention dropped to the baby in her mother's arms. His mind went to work, constructing a clinical picture of what he saw. Though the child was 8 weeks, she appeared scrawny, underweight, and although she was crying vigorously, Hayden noted that she shed no tears. There was frothing at the edges of her mouth, and with each cry a projectile of foam shot forward. He was able to pick up the faint smell of vomit on the collar of her jumpsuit. The nurse continued to rattle off a barrage of information. He held up his hand for silence. Hayden dropped to his knees and reached out to unfurl the mother's hands from around the infant's tiny body. This made the baby writhe more vigorously and brought on a new round of screams, but Hayden ignored it and unbuttoned the front of her jumpsuit. "When did you last feed her?" His educated voice was professional but soft. The distressed mother turned to her husband. "We tried maybe half an hour ago. She seemed hungry enough, but she wasn't taking the nipple. She was just mouthing it and getting frustrated." Hayden examined the child's belly just as she arched her back. The mother, who was watching Hayden, saw his eyes widen almost imperceptibly. "What is it?" she probed. Hayden touched 2 fingers to the child's abdomen, the action causing visible wave-like contractions to ripple over the child's stomach. "An olive." A curious smile formed at the edge of his lips. Both parents stared at him, uncomprehending. The nurse blinked as a colleague passed by the cubicle and stopped. The portly, middle-aged woman, sporting a tight bouffant perm, adjusted a blingy pair of spectacles hanging from a chain. The ID badge clipped to her collar identified her as Magda. "Should we get bloods?" the younger nurse queried. Magda stepped into the cubicle as Hayden turned on his haunches and spied a pad marked Radiology on a side bench. He snapped his fingers at it. The young nurse snatched up the request pad and thrust it at him as he plucked a pen from the pocket of his scrubs. Hayden acknowledged the newly arrived Magda as he scribbled on the pad. I want an urgent abdominal ultrasound. Page the surgical registrar and get him down here." He turned back to the parents as he buttoned the jumpsuit up again. "Your child has what is called pyloric stenosis. It's a stricture where the stomach meets the first part of the bowel. The ultrasound scan will confirm it, and she'll need to have an operation to correct it. She will make a full recovery." Rising to his full height, Hayden handed the request form to Magda and swept from the cubicle. "Arsehole," the younger nurse hissed as she spun on her heel, much to the consternation of her older colleague, who fixed her with a disapproving glare. "You do realise it's pouring out there, don't you?" Whoops, went forward a bit too quickly. Hang on, I'll go back. Hayden shuffled from a change room, lugging a backpack and struggling with a handful of damp towels. He'd showered and changed into a smart business suit. He deposited the towels into a nearby linen skip and then stopped at a side door and checked his reflection in the glass. With his backpack slung over one shoulder, He appeared as though he'd attempted to put the jacket and backpack on simultaneously. The lavender tie was slung around his neck, its Windsor knot tied but not yet fixed into position. The collar of his shirt was turned up and unbuttoned. He strode towards an alcove in the corridor beside the ambulance entrance, where he lifted his battered mountain bike tucked in behind a portable curtain and a large waste bin. He checked his watch and grimaced as he set about freeing the bike. Typical. The main doors to the emergency department whirred open, revealing a handsome young doctor roughly Hayden's own age, in shirt and tie and white coat. Praying that he wouldn't see him, Hayden attempted to duck back out of view, but faltered with the mountain bike. Lushcombe! Hayden stepped out from the alcove. He kept his expression flat in an effort to hide his impatience. You called it again, the registrar beamed. They're still scanning that child upstairs, but it's clear we're looking at a prominent stenosis. We're prepping for theatre right now. Hayden turned his bike towards the outer doors. Did you want to scrub in? I'll be assisting. Hayden shook his head. I have to be somewhere. I'm already late. The registrar frowned, regarding Hayden's mode of transport with a nod. He tilted his head. You do realise it's pouring out there, don't you? Hayden whipped his head up. He turned and peered out through the glass doors. Rain was teeming, spattering against the glass of the ambulance bay. His expression soured. Cocking a churlish grin, the registrar slapped his hand down on Hayden's shoulder. Good luck, mate, he chuckled. I don't need to be you. The registrar punched a green button on the side of the inner doors, which swung open under the power of an audible motor. Before retreating through them and into the clinical area beyond, he turned back and winked at Hayden. No doubt about it, Lushcombe, you're an artist. No, an artisan. He pointed at Hayden, the artisan doctor. Hayden watched him go and noticed the parents of the baby inside accompanying their child, who was now lying in a cot and being pushed by an orderly. The mother recognised Hayden, and her lips quivered as she mouthed a silent thank you. Slinging his backpack onto his shoulder, Hayden walked his bike towards the outer doors. The doors parted, revealing an outdoor ambulance bay. The inky sky above was thick with clouds, and heavy rain pounded the tarmac. Magda was sitting at a computer terminal in deep concentration. Looking up from her work, she spied Hayden standing by the exit, forlorn. She reached into a drawer and then stood and went out into the hall to join him. I'm going to be so late, Hayden said as she appeared at his side. Magda opened the small transparent package she held in her hand and removed the disposable plastic poncho, the kind sold at sporting events to protect from weather such as this. She unfurled it, then reached up to guide it over Hayden's suit and backpack. Ensuring the hood covered his head and exposed areas of his suit jacket, she stood back and inspected her handiwork. I look like I'm wearing a giant condom, Hayden observed. Magda grinned and flicked her head sideways. You better hurry up. You don't want to upset Bernadette again. Too late, Hayden grumbled as he stuffed his trouser bottoms into his socks. He swung a leg over the frame and mounted his bicycle. He hesitated, smoothing down the poncho. Won't you need this? Magda brushed him aside with a wave of her hand. I'll be all right. Claire can give me a lift to my car. Go on, get out of here. Hayden pressed his lips together. Thank you, Magda. Clutching the handlebars, he pushed down with his foot and gasped as he pedalled into the deluge. The ride to the Adelaide Oval only took something in the order of 5 minutes. It was a very long 5 minutes. He powered through the driving rain, weaving a path from the hospital and trying to make use of whatever shelter he could find on the way to the Oval precinct. He nearly upended his bike as he negotiated the busy thoroughfare of King William Road, not to mention almost being taken out by several cars. They made their displeasure known with angry blasts of their horn. Passing under the Gothic majesty of St. Peter's Cathedral, Hayden mounted the path opposite and dipped down into the Cresswell Gardens in front of the Oval. He stole a glance downward. His socks and trousers were sopping. Thankfully, the rest of him remained dry underneath the plastic. She's going to kill me, There was no time to wallow. He steered up onto a spacious boulevard in the shadow of the mighty stadium and scanned ahead, spying a sheltered bike rack that was bathed in the soft orange glow of a street lamp. Thank God. Hayden brought the bike in under cover and dismounted, spreading his legs against the cold, uncomfortable squelching of the water between them. He shrugged his backpack from his shoulders and tore the plastic poncho from his body, then bent down to secure the bike. Hayden stood and exhaled, his heart thumping. He could feel the uncomfortable warmth of perspiration in his armpits and across his chest. Splaying his arms out, Hayden took in deep, slow breaths to guide him towards calm. In the shadow of the stadium, he looked like some bedraggled, suited Christ figure. Craning his neck, he appraised the southern stand towering above him. A bulbous protrusion filled his field of view. It was characterised by a sea of glass that faced the Adelaide skyline across the leafy tree-lined River Torrens. Behind a massive glass window, swirling coloured lights moved within, and the muffled thumping of party music was audible. Slowly, he trudged towards the riverbank entrance of the Adelaide Oval. Approaching the entrance to the sumptuous William McGarry function room, Hayden checked himself just outside the doors. Having hidden inside a men's bathroom and locked the door, he'd managed to dry his trousers and socks under the heat of a powerful hand dryer. Though confident his efforts had been effective on the surface, each step he took reminded him of the uncomfortable patch of moisture lingering in the seat of his pants. A sign on the brass podium adjacent to the entrance denoted the nature of the event within: South Australian Government and Trident Software Systems Annual Awards Dinner. The glass doors revealed a throng of people enjoying a lavish function inside. Circular tables were positioned around a large dance floor. On the far side of the cavernous space, a band occupied a raised podium in front of massive windows. They were covering a quick-fire Taylor Swift number to the enthusiasm of the revellers packed onto the dance floor. The auditorium was a sea of attractive people, expensive business suits, sumptuous evening gowns, jewellery that dripped from ears and necks and glinted in the lights, creating a dazzling starfield. This was a coterie of the rich and powerful. Corporate heavyweights and government apparatchiks, politicians, staffers, and an assortment of hangers-on, some of whom Hayden recognised, though none of them were people he would normally associate with. Hayden felt a tightness in his chest, and fingers of anxiety clawed at the back of his neck, making him feel nauseous. He rubbed his hands together, remembering the promise that he'd made to his wife, that he would be here for her and he wouldn't be late. Scratch that second one. He felt awful for having failed her, but he knew he had to make it up somehow. He'd come this far, even with everything that had happened, even with everything that had conspired against him. He patted down his suit jacket and adjusted his tie, ran his fingers through his hair and went inside. Falling in behind a middle-aged couple, he began scanning the auditorium. A figure appeared at his side and tugged on his sleeve, causing Hayden to turn and come face to face with a meticulously put-together man, dressed in a sharp, double-breasted suit and a patterned yellow tie. His raven hair, clipped precisely, was slicked back and held in place with what looked like an entire can of hairspray. Hayden picked up the scent of an expensive cologne. James Fitzner smiled as he handed over one of 2 beer glasses he was holding. "You look like you could do with this," he greeted. Hayden took it and relaxed a little. "Thank you," he said, raising the glass and taking a generous gulp. James grinned and surveyed the crowd. "Your wife has crafted another winner," he remarked above the background noise. "They're talking about her, Lushcombe. Her reputation is growing fast." Hayden inspected James's face. "She will be pleased." Though Hayden knew James Fitzner through Fitzner's work with his wife, he wasn't actually sure what the man did. He was a political staffer of some sort, influential within state government, a rising star with ministerial ambitions. Despite his reputation as a workaholic, Fitzner seemed more preoccupied with driving around in expensive cars, wearing expensive clothes, and working out at expensive clubs. James Fitzner had facilitated Hayden's wife getting some important events and seemed engaged in helping her advance her career as a go-to event planner among the political and corporate set. Despite this, Hayden couldn't help but think James was a bit full of himself. Her people management skills are impeccable. I watched her work the room all night. She has them eating out of her palm, James continued. She'd be a great spin doctor. Even the Premier has shown an interest. I'll bet he has, Hayden intoned. He raised his glass to hide his distaste as James nudged Hayden's elbow in an attempt to put him at ease. James stepped in closer and pointed in the direction of the tables off to the right. Following his finger, Hayden searched the crowd until he spied a tall, elegant figure holding court in the centre of a group of men and women. Hayden studied her up and down. Her aqua-coloured gown hugged a svelte, athletic body. Her copper hair was pinned so that it fell down her neck and back like a curling wave. Twinkling droplets of stone hung from her ears, catching the light and sparkling against her cheeks. That face. High cheekbones, full and shining lips, projecting a magnetic and effortless smile. Large piercing eyes focused on each individual in turn, drawing them into the conversation and holding them as though every person was important, as if she was speaking to them and them alone. Bernadette Mannion commanded their attention effortlessly. She was as skilled a listener as she was a communicator, a woman dedicated to her craft. As Hayden continued to watch, Bernadette turned her face in his direction. Her jaw stiffened as she politely excused herself. She glided through the crowd towards Hayden and James, pausing to signal to a young woman, someone she knew. That woman, dressed in a black cocktail dress, black stockings and heels, manoeuvred in behind Bernadette, armed with the tablet computer. Its light splashed over her face and reflected in the glasses she wore underneath a severe fringe. Bernadette stopped before both men and first offered her hand to James. She regarded her husband with muted disappointment before leaning in to give him a quick peck on the cheek. "You're late," she said curtly, standing back to examine him in the low light. In an instant, Hayden felt reduced to the size of a pea. There was little doubt she was disappointed with what she saw. His appearance paled in comparison to those around him, including James. His suit was far from perfect. His trousers were rumpled, and despite the dim light, Bernadette somehow spotted watermarks at his ankles. "Jesus, Hayden, did you ride here through all that rain?" she complained out of the corner of her mouth. "Yes," Hayden confessed. Stifling a scoff, Bernadette shook her head. "Couldn't you at least have taken a taxi?" she countered. Hayden blinked as though the question was preposterous. "Not really." An uncomfortable quiet descended over the trio as James downed his beer and glanced over at the awkward but cute young assistant behind them. Hayden twitched and swapped his glass from one hand to the other. "I was running late," he explained, apology in his voice. "And I didn't want to be any later. If I'd rung for a taxi, I would have had to wait, and it would have been worse than it already is." Bernadette's rancour seemed to release, and for a moment a sympathetic flicker registered. She tilted her head. "Would you like something to eat? You must be hungry." "A little," Hayden lied. In fact, he was famished. She turned to the young woman behind her. "Amanda, could you take care of that?" Amanda Rishmiller, Bernadette's PA, signalled to a waitress who passed in their vicinity armed with a tray. Hayden hesitated as the waitress approached. He reached out for a seafood hors d'oeuvres and popped the morsel into his mouth. He shivered in momentary gratitude. It tasted good, better than he thought it would, and his stomach responded accordingly. He went back in for a second and a third, until he noticed Bernadette's flat stare. Hayden, his mouth full, projected a silent thank you at the waitress as she turned away and disappeared into the crowd. He cast his gaze out and across the room and noted several people making their way towards the raised stage as the band was winding up the current song. Through the crowd, a woman attired in a ridiculously expensive ball gown glided towards them. She came up behind Bernadette and tapped her shoulder. Speeches are about to take place. You're up, darling. Bernadette regarded both men with a flash of nervousness. Got to go and MC, she said, reaching into her clutch and plucking out a piece of paper. Wish me luck. James stepped forward and planted a kiss on her cheek. Luck, he offered, while Hayden struggled to swallow the morsel of food so he could kiss her himself. Bernadette gestured towards Hayden for the benefit of the new arrival. Celeste Warren, my husband, Hayden Lushcombe. Hayden, Celeste. She turned on her heel, ushering her PA before her. Amanda managed to turn in Hayden's direction. Hi, Hayden, she called back. And, bye, Hayden. Hayden waved, swallowing the last of his mouthful as he watched Bernadette float towards the stage. James slapped him on the shoulder. Don't worry about it, mate. She understands. Celeste studied Hayden diffidently before offering a hand. Hayden Lushcombe, are you related to the Leabrook Lushcombes? Hayden's response was deadpan. No. Celeste appeared taken aback. Oh, surely you are. There aren't that many Lushcombes in Adelaide. No, Hayden repeated. My family is from Victoria, country Victoria. Celeste suddenly grimaced as if she'd stepped on a rotten egg. Realizing he was still holding her hand, she withdrew it. Her eyes scanned him up and down. Oh, her distaste was evident. Victoria, how extraordinary. James could barely conceal a grin as he observed the exchange, which only served to agitate Hayden further. Tell me, she began, locking eyes with Celeste. That perfume you're wearing, is it sandalwood? Celeste's brow furrowed, greeting Hayden's question with confusion, before she quickly assembled a veneer of charm, of being impressed even. Not quite, she replied smoothly. It's Oridesh flower. It's Middle Eastern. Do you like it? My mistake. Sorry. I wondered whether it was pheromones, Hayden responded. Androstenone 5 has a sandalwood odour, faintly urine-like actually. It's the pheromone associated with the onset of the menstrual cycle. While James stifled the urge to choke on his beer, Celeste gasped. Her eyes bulged and she recoiled from the two men in disgust. Diners at a nearby table turned in their direction, unsure whether to laugh or be horrified. Without skipping a beat, Hayden addressed James, shedding just a little bit of his antipathy. Thank you for the beer. He turned away, his eyes going to the stage, and Bernadette, who had just stepped up to take her place near a podium. She was looking at him. Her glare was unmistakable. Around him, people from all corners of the room began returning to their seats. Without a designated table of his own, Hayden made his way across the room towards an empty club chair near the bar and moved it as far away into the corner as he could. Some time later, Bernadette moved through the crowd, searching for her husband. Frustration gathered in the muscles of her jaw as she clenched it, but she had to stifle her annoyance each time someone stepped forward to offer their congratulations or to engage her in conversation. Even as she tilted her head coquettishly, she fumed. Where is he? Turning in the direction of the bar, she scanned the patrons there until her eyes fell across a figure seated way over to the side, almost concealed from view. Though hunched over in his chair, the form was unmistakable. It was Hayden, and he was sound asleep. Bernadette strode over until she came to a stop several feet away from him. Planting her hands on her hips, she glared at him. Amanda wheeled into view around a pair of men engaged in a lively debate, almost crashing into Bernadette, but managing to prevent anything more catastrophic than upending her glasses, which had slipped to the end of her nose. Bernadette clenched her fingers against her sides as Amanda stepped out from behind her and blinked at Hayden, her features filled with sympathy for him, while Bernadette continued to glower. She exhaled in frustration. Call him a taxi, Amanda. Get him out of here before anyone sees him. Amanda pushed her glasses back into place as she took out her phone and began dialing. Bernadette shook her head at her sleeping husband and then turned away. Amanda blinked. "Do I wake him?" she called after Bernadette. "Just deal with him," Bernadette waved dismissively. "Oh dear," Amanda croaked. Let's go for another chapter, hey? Do one more, and then we'll do the Q&A. So, Chapter 2. A cylindrical length of timber spun in the clamps of a small wood lathe. An electric motor hummed a soothing refrain, which lulled the single occupant of the small garage. Armed with a slender chisel, Hayden considered the timber before him. Adjusting his stance, he wiped his brow, comparing the bulbs and the curves he had fashioned into the surface of the spinning timber with a reference photograph he had secured to the window in front of him. Glancing over his shoulder, he regarded the subject of the photograph, a 19th century Spanish mahogany elbow chair. He'd bought it for Bernadette as a birthday gift last year, with the intention of restoring it into its original splendour. It stood forlornly in the corner of the shed, resting on two supporting lengths of wood. Hayden had removed its front legs, the undamaged left leg serving as his study piece. The right leg was broken. All that remained was a splintered ruin. While impressed with the style of the chair, Bernadette had doubted he would ever get around to repairing it. To her, it was just another one of his unfinished hobby pieces, samples of which either hung from the rafters in the garage or were shoved into corners. His propensity towards collecting things was a source of frustration, if not exasperation, so far as Bernadette was concerned. Hayden had already replaced the moth-eaten fleur-de-lis seat fabric with a modern cream material that complemented the rich mahogany. He'd spent hours here and there, rubbing back the wood and fixing dozens of little imperfections on its surface. The timber now sported a beautiful sheen. All he needed to do was repair the damaged leg to return it to its full glory. Leaning in, Hayden touched the chisel to a cast iron rest and moved the sharpened end inward until it touched a valley on the timber's surface. A delicate ribbon of wood curled outward, dropping over the edge of the tool rest and falling to the floor. He worked the timber, drawing back from the lathe to check his work. After several minutes, he set the chisel down and lifted his goggles. He thumbed the power switch on the lathe and leaned in to compare the two pieces. He was hopeful. He felt behind him for the metal surface of a motor vehicle and found it. He sat down on the drop-down tray of his classic 1948 FX Holden utility. For someone who wasn't usually enamoured with shining objects, the Holden was perhaps playing against Hayden's type. Featuring shiny burgundy paintwork and polished chrome, the classic Holden had been owned by an elderly gentleman who had spent a good portion of his retirement restoring it, or so Hayden had been told. He had snapped up the vehicle at an estate auction. For Hayden, it was less a quirky indulgence than it was a practical mode of transport, enabling him to travel into the rural areas of South Australia on his antique furniture hunts. The rear tray was spacious enough to carry several items if the mood took him. By contrast, the vehicle beside it, an extravagant yellow Audi coupe, was Bernadette to a T. Though they had purchased it together, Hayden rarely drove it. With his tall frame, he felt cramped behind the wheel, despite what the dealer had said about it being endlessly adjustable. He didn't mind. He had his Holden. Hayden was happy for Bernadette to cruise around town, impressing all and sundry in her sphere of influence, and looking beautiful doing it. Hayden picked up a piece of sandpaper and smoothed the area he'd been working on, then released the chair's leg from the clamps. He inspected the reference photograph. Despite the obvious difference in wood colour, it would only take a few dozen coats of stain to make the newly turned leg nearly identical to the existing one. Hayden had been around wood lathes for much of his life, although he had only recently taken up woodcraft again. Until they had purchased the house, Hayden and Bernadette had never been in a position to stretch out, as it were, having rented small, semi-detached dwellings or inner-city apartments. This was the first time Hayden had owned any sort of space in which to indulge his pastime. He dropped to his haunches and opened the door of a small bark fridge tucked under the workbench and retrieved a beer. As he rose and twisted the cap, he glanced to his right. Pinned to a corkboard on the adjacent wall was a small black and white photograph. A young boy, no older than 8 or 9, stood before a machine, enormous by comparison. A pair of protective, muscular arms surrounded the boy, though the face of the owner, whose arms were cut from view, save for the tip of his nose and the rim of a pair of spectacles. The man's hands held the boy as they perched over a wood lathe. The photograph captured a moment between father and son, working together at the machine to craft something from this timber before them. Hayden held the beer bottle up to the photograph in a salute. "I did it, Russell." It was Saturday afternoon, and it had been a good 6 hours since Bernie had left him at their usual breakfast haunt, a chic cafe along King William Road near their house. In an effort to make up for his tardiness last night, Hayden had suggested they grab a bite to eat, thinking he'd try to apologise. It was going well, at least he thought it was going well, but Bernadette's phone had run hot as she fielded calls from Amanda, who was intelligence gathering on her behalf in the hopes of finding out how the Trident executives thought the dinner had gone. James had also called out of the blue, saying he needed to touch base with Bernadette and Amanda at their Halifax Street office because of some major development. Before Hayden realised it, Bernadette had gathered up her things and declared she had to go. He'd protested, and they'd argued, attracting the attention of other diners as Hayden tried to convince her to at least finish her breakfast. The damage was done. Bernadette berated him once again for his lack of understanding, and she'd left him and her half-eaten egg white omelette at the cafe. Hayden couldn't even remember if he apologised. He took some small comfort in the knowledge that Bernie would be home eventually. She always came home eventually. He left his phone in the house on the kitchen bench, resisting the temptation to call her. Hayden had learned, whenever these complications came up, to give Bernadette her space. As he took a swig of his beer, however, he experienced a note of sadness. The precious Saturday had been lost because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. He set the bottle down, hung his goggles on a hook behind him, and appraised the chair. He took the newly turned leg and hunched down, lining up the peg at the top of the leg with the corresponding hole in the armrest. With a gentle push, he sleeved it into place. Satisfied, Hayden hoisted the chair in his arm, grabbed the beer bottle and manoeuvred out to a shady spot on the manicured lawn of the back garden, to set the chair down on a canvas sheet, on which sat a can of wood stain and a paintbrush. Regarding the clear afternoon sky, Hayden reasoned the conditions were perfect to at least get a couple of coats done while the light was good, and there were no clouds in sight. He cast a cursory glance across to the house, through the large windows of the living room. No signs of life inside. He shrugged, setting to work applying careful coats of stain to the chair. By late afternoon, Hayden had set the brush aside, grabbed up another beer and flopped down on the grass. He admired his handiwork. The leg blended almost perfectly with the rest of the chair. From the interior of the house came the sounds of movement, a closing door, keys dropped onto a bench. He was aware of her before he saw her. Bernadette emerged from the house and stepped out onto the deck, studying him as she crossed the lawn. The afternoon breeze lingered about the hem of her flowing summer dress, lifting the material and revealing her perfect tanned legs. She stopped a few feet away and regarded the chair, keeping her expression neutral. Crossing his legs, Hayden glanced up at her. "What do you think?" Bernadette shrugged indifferently. "You finished it." "Thought I'd better get my act together and stop putting it off. Your birthday was months ago, after all." His gaze drifted down to the bottle. "Sorry about this morning," he offered, "and about last night." Bernadette's expression softened. She closed the remaining distance between them and sat down beside him, stretching out her long legs and wiggling her toes. She reached across to pluck the beer bottle from his hand. "We finished the debrief. James has almost got us into a great position with our tender." Hayden watched as he sipped his beer. Bernadette tilted her head sideways. She pointed the bottle at the chair. Those legs don't match. Hayden frowned. What do you mean the legs don't match? They don't. See? Handing the bottle to Hayden, Bernadette stood and went over to the chair. She ran her finger down the original leg, caressing 3 symmetrical bulbs in the timber. She repeated the action with the newly repaired leg, which sported only 2. Hayden cantilevered forward and studied his work anew. His face dropped. Bernadette was right, and while only a sharp eye would have noticed the error, now that he could see it, it stuck out like a sore thumb. His heart plunged. Bernadette appraised her husband with something like pity. You are a duffer, she chided, scratching her fingers through his hair affectionately. All that effort, he lamented, for nothing. Russell would never have made such an elementary mistake. Put it away, Bernadette suggested with a dismissive sigh. Stop wasting your time on this stuff. I don't understand why you bother. Hayden felt a nasty twinge of hurt between his temples. I don't feel like cooking tonight, Bernadette declared, sashaying back across the lawn to the house. A coquettish grin crept across her lips. Let's order in some Thai food, open a bottle of wine, maybe fool around. You up for it? Her boldness knocked Hayden off kilter, and, all at once, he couldn't reconcile his conflicting emotions. Watching him conspiratorially, Bernadette teased him with graceful movements of her body, while the still incomplete chair stood in front of him, mocking him. Hayden got to his feet, lifted the chair, and deposited it inside the garage, slamming the door shut behind him. Okay, so I'll stop there. I don't know whether if I read on now it'll get a bit too boring or not. I can see some people here, and I've got a dog here beside me who's actually, look at him. You're on the camera. I don't know what he wants, so get down. Okay, so thanks to the people that I can see online now, and I appreciate you tuning in. So I've got some questions that readers and friends posted on my feed over the course of the last week, and I'll go ahead and answer them now. Sort of got them in this book here. So Molly, my good friend Molly from Seattle. Hi Molly, how are you? Molly asks, you switch up your genres nearly every time. Do you have a new genre in mind for the near future? So I've let slip a couple of times now that I'm actually keen on a sequel to The Recipient. And this is really something new for me because I'm really scared of sequels, and like I don't write books with you know, a series in mind. But the thing with The Recipient was that I really like that character of Casey Schilling, and I think that there is an opportunity to kind of tell more of her story. And so I've been kicking around some ideas for the last couple of months, and I'm really starting to pull some threads together in what I hope will be a really cool sequel. So it will sort of stay along the lines of a psychological thriller, but I'll sort of ratchet it up for it to be kind of like a political thriller. So there'll be a lot of cloak and dagger stuff. So I really like those thrillers from the likes of Robert Ludlum, The Bourne Identity, Clive Cussler, and although he was more adventure and stuff. So but yeah, I'm really confident that I can pull this one off. So I'm going to have a crack at it. So people who know me know that my output is fairly low compared to a lot of other authors, but I think that's just the way that I am. So yeah. So this will take some time. So yeah. another good friend of mine, Melanie from Victoria in Australia. Hi, Melanie. Now she writes, how do you balance the writing, working and kid wrangling? Discipline, slave wife, helpful cyborgs? Thanks, Melanie. I've actually got a pretty cool weekly schedule, I guess you could say, set up. So my wife works on Mondays and Tuesdays, and my kids are at school, although they're on holidays at the moment. And I don't work on Mondays and Tuesdays, so I've got the entire house to myself. So when I'm deep into a project, I am able to kind of devote those days, Monday and Tuesday, to pure writing. And then throughout the rest of the week, what I do is I often take a notebook to work with me. And, there's quiet times throughout the night where I can actually review what I've done and make notes about what to do going forward. And so that sort of makes the process really, manageable. So that's kind of like my method. And I'd love to be able to do it full time, but it's not really that realistic at this stage. So, because I earn a pretty good wage as a nurse, and not as much as an author. So yeah. Steve writes, what prompted you to set your novel in the town of Walhalla? So I've only just read 2 chapters there, but as you can, as a lot of you probably know, that this is a small town story. And Walhalla is really significant to me because it's a town that I've pretty much known my entire life. My dad took me up there, I think, when I was about 4 years old, for the first time, and it sort of captured me from that time. Just this little historic gold town right up in the mountains in Victoria, that had a permanent population at that time of about like 6 or 7 people, like permanent population. But in its heyday, like back in the 1880s, Walhalla was like a gold rush town, and it had something like 4,500 residents, which was it was a metropolis basically. So yeah. And it had a vibrant economy based on the gold that was being pulled out of the mines. And so I just really wanted to find a personal setting that I could put this novel into, and Walhalla sort of fit the bill. And yeah, I'm really pleased that I chose it. So I've shared different pictures across my Instagram feed and here at Facebook of the town. And it really, really showcases the beauty of it. So yeah, so there's that. So now I'm going to grab my little mouse here. I'm going to scroll down just to see what's coming in by the comments. Hello, people. Okay, so we've got a few people watching, but no questions. Not a lot of questions. So what else can I talk about? I guess what I didn't read at the beginning of the novel, there was I had the opportunity to meet a really lovely woman named Alice Fraser, who's a comedian and writer, and I've had the opportunity to sit down with her on her podcast, Tea with Alice, and we've talked about a few things, interesting and dangerous ideas and the like. And so I asked her if she would be willing to write an epigram for this book, and she came up with a really beautiful passage, which I'll just read to you now. And it says, "I don't believe in life post-death, or even in a moment that stays on beyond itself. What I do believe in is momentum, that one thought leads to another, then that people leave shapes in other people, and those shapes carry forward. And that's from Alice R. Fraser. It's that last line, that people leave shapes in other people, and those shapes carry forward, that I found really beautiful. And when she wrote it, and I'd actually put that on my wall and sort of remembered that when I was writing, and tried to sort of incorporate that thinking into the story, because there's characters that have come and gone, people who have died, and that still have an influence on, particularly on Hayden, as the story goes forward. So yeah. So I'll leave it at that for now. Let me know what you think. Did you enjoy this little reading session of mine? I would like to continue doing it. Perhaps just read a couple of chapters a week, and see what people think of it. Yeah. In the meantime, visit my website, deanfromaustralia.com. Just type Dean from Australia into Google, and that should bring up my site. You can actually purchase copies of the book directly from my website, or if you prefer, it's available anywhere you can buy good books. I guess the only advantage of buying it from me is that I'll sign a copy for you. Great gift idea. Got Christmas coming up, things like that. So yeah. So I'd like to do this again, and I'll sign off for now. Let me know what you think in the comments, and yeah, if this was popular enough, I'll do it again next week, perhaps. So okay, goodbye for now.